Hey there guys, it's Delta49er here with episode 2 of my Minecraft Bukkit server tutorial series. In this episode I'm going to be covering all of the default Bukkit configuration files and folders. So let's go ahead and open up the Bukkit server folder, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of different files and folders. The first one is the logs folder, and in that is a log. Now once you generate multiple logs, it will have these zipped up folders which will hold this file just so that it's not so massive that you are creating huge files on your server. So this is really what we saw in the command prompt, just in a text file format, so it's easier to read, easier to copy if you need any information. The next is the plugins folder. This is empty right now, but we will be adding some plugins in future episodes, and this is where you will put them, all of the jar files and folders. Next are the world files. Now depending on what the world is called in your server.properties, it is default to world, and then it creates the nether and the end for that world. But whatever it's called in the server.properties will be what it is called here, and you can delete these and it will regenerate them when you start up the server. The banned IPs file and the banned players file is where your banned IPs and banned players information is held. I do suggest, if you would like to ban a player, that you type in the command, which is something we will get to soon. You type in the command rather than manually typing it in. They used to make it a little bit easier, but now with all of the UUIDs, it's a little bit difficult to have all the information in that it really needs. So you'd put the IPs of the players, just in case they have other accounts that you'd like to ban, in that file. And here you would just put their name and the UUID. And again, I would suggest, instead of just typing this in manually, just going into the server and doing /ban and the name. It's a lot easier, and it will create all of the information for you. The next is the bucket.yml. I'm going to open that in Notepad++, which I will link in the description. It's a great thing to have for editing all of these files, but I'm going to go through all of this. So this is just some information about it. So the first section is the settings section, and allow end is whether the end is enabled or not. Because Mojang has not added this to the server.properties, it is in the bucket.yml instead. So if this is true, the end will be enabled, and if it's false, it will not be. That goes for any of these things. If it is true, that means that the whatever the description is will be occurring, and if false, it will not be. Warn on overload. If the server is running out of memory, it will say warning, can't keep up, and it will warn in the command prompt. The permissions file, this is something we really won't use, but if you would like to use the bucket permissions, then this is where it is located. So if we go ahead and go to that folder, you can see that there is a permissions.yml file here. Next is the update folder, and this is where the Bukkit updates when it downloads the Bukkit new version of Bukkit. This is where it will go to. So if we go ahead and go into that folder again, you can see that although it is not here, if it is set to update, it will show up right in this folder as update. The ping packet limit is currently disabled, but it is how many packets the tab list in-game can use to ping the players and get the connections and all that. The next is use exact login location. This is, if it is enabled, if the person, say they log out and someone dumps a pile of sand on their where they were standing, they would suffocate if this was true, but if not, it will actually find the nearest safe spot, so it might teleport them up or teleport them maybe a block over, just to find the safe spot for them to log back in. Plugin profiling is whether the /timings command can be used, and it just measures the of how long the events for each of your plugins takes. Connection throttle, this is in milliseconds, and what it is it limits the amount of login attempts someone can make to get into the server at once. Query plugins will allow the plugins to be queried remotely, so if you need to get information from the plugins, maybe things like Dynmap, which is something we'll get into, things that require a web server, if this is false, they will not be able to do that. Deprecated verbose is the command prompt will show messages if a plugin you're using has events that are deprecated, and it will show things that unless on default, unless the plugin has a line of code that says just ignore the message, default will show the message, and true has all of them showing, and false will show none of them. Now, shutdown message is if you stop the server, it's just the message that if people are kicked, the message that will show up. Next is spawn limits. Now, these are all by chunk, so this is the maximum that can spawn per chunk of monsters, animals, water animals, which is like squid, and ambient, which is like bats and things like that. Chunk garbage collection is a utility that unloads chunks that did not unload by themselves. So the period in ticks is the amount of time that has to go by before another chunk garbage collection occurs. And the load threshold is the amount of chunks that need to be loaded since the last garbage collection for the chunk garbage collection to work. 0 is disabled, so that means that the chunk garbage collection will not work at all, and then everything else will actually unload. I would not do anything too low, but other than that, there's really not any guidance to the load threshold. The ticks per is the amount of ticks that must go by for a animal to spawn, a monster to spawn, and for the autosave. So you can see that there's 400 for the animal spawns as default, 1 for monster spawns, and 6,000 for the autosave. Autosave just saves the world and everything, and obviously monster spawns and animal spawns are just monster and animal spawns. The auto updater is an updating service that will update the bucket jar, and it will download it to this update folder if it is enabled. And if not, you'll either have to update it manually or it won't update it at all, and that is not recommended. You should update your jar, even if you're just updating from development build to development build, or if you're updating from development build to a recommended build or a beta build. You should update the jar when new versions come out because there are bug fixes and things. So on broken is if there is a game-breaking bug or an exploit or something, it will actually warn whatever is down here. So either warn the console or warn the ops, or you can have it warn nothing or just the ops, just the console. It will warn them. On update is when the jar updates, it will warn the console and warn the ops, which is also, you can change to nothing, you can change to just one or the other. The preferred channel is the preferred channel that you'd like to download the bucket jar from. So RB is recommended build, beta is the beta build, and dev is the development build. Host is just where it downloads the jar from. Suggest channels, it will suggest channels, say there's a more stable beta build or something, it will suggest that you download that in the console. Aliases, this is kind of weird, it's little strange, but it's really just the commands.yml. I think this pretty much does nothing, but yes, it is just commands.yml, and it defaults to now in commands.yml, so you can pretty much just not worry about this part there. The database is the internal Bukkit database. This is not like your MySQL databases. This is just an internal thing that Bukkit can use. You can use with Bukkit, and pretty much you don't really want to change the isolation of the driver unless you know a lot about databases, but the password, the username, and even the URL you can change if you look at the wiki and learn about that. Now next is the commands.yml. Now this I was just talking about with the aliases, and you can see that we have the aliases here. Now they just have one example one, and that is iCanHasBucket, and that will just give you the command /version and then the $1 dash. So you can put them in like dash and whatever else, like ban this guy, whatever you would like to do there, you can add to that file. The next file is the help.yml. We're going to open that, and you can see that it's all commented, but if you uncomment some of these things, you'd have to uncomment the general topics to here to get all of the general topics. Anything with a colon at the end pretty much means that it is part of the configuration that you need to include for it to actually work. Anything that's sort of like just a sentence, just explaining it, is something that it's just there to explain it. You don't need to uncomment it, and actually if you uncomment it, it could mess up the file. So there's just a whole bunch of different things here, and you have your rules. So if you uncomment all of these, if you do /rules, it will bring up the rules that you have in here. The first one is a color code, the second one is the number, and then just the message here. The permission is just the permission you would use to get to the rules. If you didn't have that permission, you wouldn't be able to do the rules command. The ban commands, this is again same thing, just it will show information about the ban commands. And then we have some other ones like /stop. It will give you some information about what /stop is. And you can continue doing that for any command. Now, I don't really expect that you're going to want to use these after we get into some essential plugins that you're going to want to use, because it will actually automatically generate these things for you and you will not need to really type all this in manually. So let's go ahead and go to the ops.json. This is where you'll put your ops. Now again, with like the banned players and the banned IPs files, you're going to want to use the command because they have made it a little bit more difficult to actually type it in manually. It's not just a straight text file. There's more information like UUID and all that. So you're just going to want to use the command prompt for that, but it will add all the ops into here. Next is permissions. This is empty, but if you wanted to add permissions in here, which again, I don't think you're going to want to use this once we get into some essential plugins that will replace this, but yes, you will be able to put all of your permissions in here. And if you'd like to know about the formatting and all that, let me know if you want me to do an episode on this, but I probably will rather not want to do that because there's much better plugins to handle permissions. But if you'd like to know about it, let me know. And also you can look on the wiki. I will leave a link to that and you can look in the documentation about it. The run.bat file is just how we run the server. The next file is the server.properties. This file contains all of the default Minecraft server properties. So we have the generator settings first. This is the world generation settings, which you can change around. I will leave a link to the wiki page and you can look at all of the different settings that you can possibly use for that. The op permission level is the level that ops are at. So if you have it at 4, that is the highest level. It's 1 through 4. So the first one is that the ops can bypass the spawn protection. 2, that they can use /clear, /difficulty, /effect, /game mode, /game rule, /give, and /TP, and also edit command blocks. The third is that they can use /ban, /deop, and /kick, and as well as /op. Now these are they grow on each other. So you have, if you have level 3, then they can use 1, 2, and 3. And then 4 is that they can use /stop, and that would give them pretty much all of the commands there. So next is allow nether, and this is either true or false. If it is true, then the nether will be enabled. If false, it will not be. And if it is false, and say you just changed that, but the nether was already generated, you can actually go ahead and delete that, and it will not recreate it when you try to start up your server. The level name is the name for the world. So you can see that there's world, then world_nether, and world_the_end. So it pretty much just puts the suffixes at the end of whatever this level name is. Enable query allows outsider things to query the server for things like the amount of players or the players that are online. Allow flight is that allows people to fly, usually with mods, to fly in survival mode or adventure mode. This is not creative flying. Creative flying doesn't count under this allow flight parameter. Announce player achievements is it will announce the player achievements, so all of the achievements will just be put into the chat. The server port is the server port that it is running on, so you have 25565 being the default, and you can change it to anything else that's not used. I do recommend using 25565 unless you can't, because it's a little easier. You don't actually have to type in the port when you try to connect to the server. The level type is the type of world. So you have default, which is just the standard world. The flat world, which is just flat. You just do all caps flat. Large biomes, all in caps as well, is just the large biomes type of world. And you have amplified, which will generate an amplified world. Enable Archon or remote console allows people to remotely connect to the console. Level seed is the seed for the world. Forced game mode, we'll get to a thing that says game mode, and that will actually force everyone to be in that game mode if this is true. Server IP, if you are maybe using something like Hamachi, you can select the server IP so that you actually have an IP. You can basically forward it to it. Otherwise, we'll just use the IP that you are currently on. Max build height is the maximum build height. It's fairly self-explanatory. Spawn NPCs is if NPCs will spawn, like villagers and all. Whitelist is if the whitelist is enabled. Spawn animals, are animals going to spawn or not. Hardcore is if it is in hardcore mode or not. Snooper enabled is the Mojang utility that just collects information from the server. Online mode is if that is true, only players with premium accounts can connect, and if it is false, then hacked clients and things can also connect. Resource pack is the resource pack that your server is using, and this is a link to a .zip folder or a regular folder, but usually if you're going to have it on the internet, it would be a .zip folder, and you just put that there. PvP is either true or false if player versus player is enabled or not. Difficulty, 0 is peaceful, 1 is easy, 2 is normal, and 3 is hard. Enable command blocks is if command blocks are enabled on the server. Game mode, this is what I was talking about before. So you have the forced game mode, and if that is true, whatever game mode this is set to, it will force all the players into. Player idle timeout is if this is something besides 0, this is a utility that will actually kick people for just standing around for a certain amount of time, whatever you put here. Max players is the max amount of people that can join the server at one time. Spawn monsters is the monster spawning, so if you have this true, monsters will spawn. If not, they will not. Generate structures are villages and other desert temples and things. View distance is the default view distance. Spawn protection is pretty much just the area around the spawn that you cannot build in if you don't have permission to. MOTD is the message that shows up in the server list. That's all for the server.properties. Next is the user cache. Now this is going to be pretty empty because we don't really have anyone on the server, but this will actually populate users itself. You don't really need to do anything with that. Whitelist is just the whitelist. So again, another thing that you should just use the commands. It's a lot easier. It will generate this sort of format, and you can use this as the whitelist. And that is really it for the default configuration files. If you do have any other questions about it, or you found something that you'd like me to do another tutorial, another episode on, then let me know in the comments below. Also, anything else like plugins or things that pertain to Bukkit that you want me to do a tutorial on, let me know that as well for future episodes. And if you did enjoy this, a like and a favorite would be greatly appreciated. And also share this with your friends, help them out as well. If you're not already, make sure you follow me on Twitter, like the Facebook fan page, and follow me on Google+. And if you're new to the channel and you do enjoy gaming, tutorials, and reviews, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching.